All right, thanks, Dan. Again, my name is Alan Nochumson of Nochumson PC. I have a law firm that's headquartered in Center City, Philadelphia. My practice is exclusively real estate and business matters, both from a transactional point of view and a litigation point of view and everything in between. I've been writing a real estate column for the Legal Intelligencer for the past 20 years. So you can go on my website, nochumson.com. I believe there's probably over 125, 150 articles on real estate matters that you can read about. I've also been teaching at Jenkins Law Library. Dan, correct me if I'm wrong, I believe for at least the past 15 years. This is the first time I'm teaching about zoning law. I've taught about landlord-tenant law, as well as putting together agreements to sale. I felt it was appropriate to teach about zoning law because, quite honestly, I have a rather robust zoning practice in Philadelphia nowadays. Currently, we have 60 zoning appeals that are pending before the Zoning Board of Adjustment. And I thought it would be a good way to add another type of class to the Jenkins Law Library CLE process. Anyway, so like Dan was stating, if you have any questions, let me know. We only have an hour, so I'm trying not to get into too much in the nitty gritty of would this need a variance? Would this need a special exception? I want to talk more about the process. I would say there's probably a dozen or so attorneys in the city of Philadelphia who regularly appear in front of the Zoning Board of Adjustment. I'm one of them. And to get through that process is sometimes overwhelming for pro se people, but equally overwhelming for an attorney who's never been a part of that process. It's not a difficult process. It's just a process that if you do it over and over and over again, you get familiar with it and you feel comfortable with it. So I handed you a packet of materials for handling zoning variances and special exceptions in Philadelphia, which include exhibits as well, which I thought would be practical for purposes of our CLE. So the first thing is, Philadelphia has a zoning code called the Philadelphia Zoning Code, right? And every property in the city of Philadelphia has a zoning classification, right? We went over in my materials all the different types of zoning classifications, right? Depending on the zoning classification, there are requirements from both a dimensional standpoint as well as a use standpoint. If you want to use your property a certain way, in terms of I want to use it as a restaurant, I want to use this as a single family house, I want to use it as a multifamily, you have to submit an application with the Department of Licenses and Inspections, a zoning permit application, right? If you want to change the dimensions of the building structure, or put a building structure on there, you need to start the process for the most part with the zoning, to file a zoning permit application. If you want to relocate lot lines by subdividing a lot or taking multiple lots and consolidating them, you're going to need to start that process, or at least that process needs to go through L&I, right? So most of my clients, nowadays, reach out to me beforehand to say, okay, does this project make sense? Forget about it being as of right from a variance point of view. So the city of Philadelphia is great now in terms of the information that they have online. I always recommend to attorneys and to my clients, to look at atlas, atlas.phila.gov. If you go on that website, you'll get so much information about any property in the city of Philadelphia. If any of you go on, you might as well go on now and just take a look at it while I'm talking. But every property will have, if you look at it, it'll have a property section saying how big the lot is, who owns the property. It'll have in the deed section, it'll actually have unofficial copies of all deeds and mortgages up to a certain date. So you'll know who owns the property, how much they paid for it, what mortgages they have against the property. They have an L&I section. So you can go in there, and the city's better about their record keeping now than years ago, but you can go in there and see what permits, zoning permits are as of right, that have been filed with the city. You can also see if there's any violations against the property of public record. Then there's the zoning section, right? So the zoning section will say, what the zoning classification the property is, right? What if there are any pending bills from a zoning perspective against the property, if there are any pending zoning appeals as to the property, and then which groups, which we'll go over, community groups are affiliated with the property. They're called registered community organizations, right? So every property in the city of Philadelphia, well, not every, but 99.9% of properties will have a community organization that's attached to the property that they've asked to get all notices of any changes in use or zoning or anything regarding the property, right? So you'll see who they are, what the community groups are. You'll have their contact information from a phone number and from a email perspective and the name of the contact person. The last thing you'll see on atlas.phila.gov is, I believe it says nearby. You can see like nearby 311 calls. You can see if there's, most importantly, if there's been any zoning appeals. This only goes back, I believe, a few years, but you can see from a certain radius of the property if there's any zoning appeals or zoning matters of properties in the vicinity. So this will help you in preparation for both the community meeting and the ZBA hearing, and we'll talk about that later. You also see a ton of maps. There are Google Maps, there are city maps, there are zoning maps. Again, these are things that will help you put your presentation materials together. So this is really something that you should like know very well. You should probably bookmark it. It'll help you in terms of like preparation before a client's engaged and during the time they're engaged. The other site to look at is the Office of Property Assessment website. I believe it's property.phila.gov. It's good to see, like, from the city, because I know that's integrated somewhat on Atlas, but there's one thing that that non-Atlas that's on the Office of Property Assessment website. The city will tell you in the Office of Property Assessment website, not just the size of the lot, which, by the way, sometimes differs between whether you're looking on Atlas versus the OPA's website, but also the size of any building structure against the property or on the property. So it's good to know, like, size of building structure because that will help you prepare for the hearing and the community meeting, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, so we're in unprecedented times, right? We're closed because of COVID-19, right? Or some parts of the government and society are closed because of COVID-19. Since basically mid-March, the ZBA has not appeared, right? There's been no hearings in front of the ZBA, and sporadically there's been community meetings. Traditionally, though, like, if before COVID-19, you would, again, go through the process of filing appeals with L&I and filing, filing a zoning permit with the L&I, filing appeals with ZBA. That would all be done in person, right? So it just happened that the week before COVID-19 hit, where the city and the state shut down, the city actually created this online system called Eclipse, right? So now because of Eclipse, you can file your zoning permit applications on Eclipse. You can file your ZBA appeals on Eclipse. So that without Eclipse, my practice would have come to a complete halt. Luckily, because of Eclipse, and I have an Eclipse account, and any attorney can get an Eclipse account, as long as they have a commercial activity license number, they can file things with L&I as well as the ZBA. So the first thing is we need to focus on when we're looking at a zoning matter. A client engages us. Most of my clients engage me to file the ZBA appeal. Some clients engage me, depending on the complexity of the situation, to file starting with the zoning permit application. Again, nowadays, the only way that you're going to be able to file it until L&I and ZBA open up, for the most part, we'll talk about, the ZBA a little bit differently because there's new ordinances or new regulations in place. But the only way to file for L&I is through Eclipse right now because the L&I offices are closed and they're located in the Municipal Services Building. But if you're filing the zoning permit application, it's a pretty straightforward form. I would only state, though, that if you're going to do it as an attorney, the L&I application, the zoning permit application, you really do it stuff for like things that don't affect the building structure at all. So if you're like, if you have an RSA 5 property, which means residential single family attached, and you're looking to potentially convert it into a duplex, or you have an RM1 property, which is residential multifamily, and you're looking to put it as a duplex, and if there's a building there and nothing else is changing from an exterior point of view, that may be something that you're comfortable, that you may be able to do as yourself. If you're putting a new building structure on the property, or your client is, or you're expanding the building structure, they're going to need, architectural drawings, site plans, things like that, which you're not going to be able to do. But it's a simple change in use, you may be able to get away with that. So let's assume you file the zoning permit application, or the architect or whatever real estate professional, expediter or whatever, file the zoning permit application, and it doesn't follow the zoning code, right? It falls outside the zoning code, right? So there's really two paths. Like, we can be seeking a variance, or we can seek a special exception, right? A variance means this. The zoning code has like certain requirements in terms of use and dimensional requirements. You're asking for something that exceeds that. So you are asking, you would want to vary from the zoning code, right? So you would have to go get a variance with the ZBA. If you are seeking like a special exception, right, from the zoning code, it's a use that's conditionally approved, like a lot of restaurants in town, right? They need to go through a process to get to ultimately the ZBA to get approval, because the use in itself, a restaurant on that one property is fine, but they want to make sure that actual operator, they mean the city, that actual operator is someone who's responsible enough that they can feel comfortable giving some type of license, or here, a zoning permit, right? So there are two paths, variance, and then there's the special exception, but they go down the same path. It's just the standard of review is differently. So say, like, again, you fall outside the zoning code, you get a variance, you'll get what's called a notice of refusal. Say you're conditionally approved, but you have to get like a special exception, you would get a notice of referral. So from the time you get the special exception and the notice of refusal and the notice of referral, you have 30 days from that point to file an appeal with the ZBA. Again, traditionally, before Eclipse, you would have to go down to 1515 Arch Street, 18th floor, where the ZBA's administrator is. You would either have mailed it, or you would have hand delivered it to get it filed. I always recommend, when you're dealing with a city, to hand deliver it, because things get lost in the process. Things like, and you may want to talk to the administrator to find out where the potential hearing date's going to be, things like that. So you got a notice of refusal, you got a notice of referral. What do you do with that, right? So first things first, you got to make sure it's correct, right? You got to make sure that, first of all, if you look at and I don't actually think I gave a notice of refusal or notice of referral as an example in my exhibits, but the notice of refusal or referral is going to say it's a notice of refusal or referral. It's going to give the property address. You want to make sure you have the right property address on the notice. You want to make sure there's going to say the scope of work, like the proposed scope of work, erection of a two-family structure, or legalization of a two-family structure, or like a restaurant establishment with a seating capacity, whatever your scope of work is, you got to make sure it's within what you actually want to do. If it doesn't include everything, you may then have to start from scratch. We found that like a lot of zoning attorneys and a lot of or people who do zoning work, or real estate professionals, sometimes miss things that forces the client to start the process all over again, right? So like a good example is this. We had a situation last year where a client was trying to legalize a two-unit building. It's an RSA 5 property, which only allows for single family. They were trying to put 2 units in there, and they went through the process with another attorney, where it was 2 units in a pre-existing building structure. They got the zoning permit. Next thing you get after the zoning permit is the building permit. They went through the variance process, got approved by the neighborhood, got approved by the council person, and then the ZBA approved it. They then try to get building permits to go on top of that. Again, every project in the city of Philadelphia, the first thing you do is get the use permit, the zoning permit, and if you're doing any construction work, or here you're trying to, here they may have, maybe it was a triplex where they needed to put sprinklers, they needed to get a building permit on top of that, right? Well, during the building permit phase, the examiner at L&I was looking at it, and they stated, well, your building structure is bigger than what is of record. So apparently they didn't even know this, but I don't remember if the building structure was already there, the extension, and they just, they bought it, or if they extended it out. Either way, the zoning permit that they got was a 2-family dwelling within a pre-existing building structure. Well, no, it should have been a 2-family dwelling with an addition to the rear of the property. By not having that addition to the rear of the property included within their original zoning variance application and then their zoning permit, they had to start the process all over again. So it's really important to focus on what the scope of what you're actually seeking, to make sure that it encompasses everything. A lot of times, another thing that I see that people miss, if there's parking, like there may be a curb cut there, right? Say you're a pre-existing property and you have a curb cut, and you assume, oh, okay, the curb cut there, it's legal. Well, a lot of times what's happened is people put illegal curb cuts in, and the new property owner didn't even realize that was the case. So you got to make sure, especially when you have parking that's pre-existing, that's noted in the pre-existing in the original application that you filed with L&I. So when you get the zoning permit, it's reflected in that. Again, if there's other uses that have been existing that are of record, you'll put that in the application. So say there's like a mixed-use building where there's a commercial aspect on the first floor and residential above, and you're just changing the commercial, you would say like whatever the commercial use, and then you would put a disclaimer: all other pre-existing approved uses of the property remain the same. But with parking, you find that it's best to actually denote that there is parking as part of this project to legalize it, right?
Okay, I'm sorry, hate to do this. I got to jump in with the first code. First code is ZBA. ZBA is the first code. One more time, ZBA is the first code. Okay, back to you. Thanks.
Okay. So you looked at the notice of refusal. You looked at the notice of referral. You have to file it within 30 days. We talked about the ways you can file it now, where to file it, right? Right now, to file an application for appeal, which is part of our exhibit packet, I believe that's A, that's for variance, or you want to file an application for a special exception, which is our exhibit B, you have to file within 30 days, right? Where to file it right now, Eclipse is probably the best, I would think, the best way to do it. Now, the ZBA just issued guidelines this week, right? So all the stuff that was filed pre-Eclipse, right? That were there was anything that was filed pre-Eclipse, anything that was filed before the government shutdown. The ZBA put a stay on the deadline to file the appeals, right? So we have this one client where the notice of refusal, I believe, was dated March 10th, right? And it's a long story, and it's kind of in our materials a little bit, but because the zoning permit application was filed pre-Eclipse, and because the notice of refusal date was also pre-Eclipse, and Eclipse was March 13th, or on or about March 13th, because the application and the notice of refusal were dated pre-Eclipse, I couldn't file the actual zoning appeal, right? I couldn't file it via Eclipse at least. The ZBA just issued guidelines this week stating, and by the way, the ZBA also said that anything like that, you didn't need to the 30-day period was staged, right? So they just issued guidelines saying, well, now you have 14 days, I believe, from June 22nd to file any of those appeals. And you can't do it via Eclipse. You're going to have to do it. You're going to have to mail it in. So yesterday I mailed in that one appeal that kind of fell, that was kind of an outlier. I mailed it in. I actually then emailed a copy of it to the ZBA's administrator saying, hey, this is what we put in today's mail. Again, just in case it gets lost in the shuffle. We put a check. They're rather expensive. We just want to make sure it gets properly processed, things like that. So in terms of, Eclipse, you can definitely sign up on Eclipse in terms of getting an account. And if but if you didn't do the zoning permit application, you got to get affiliated with the actual zoning matter in order to file the appeal, right? And I give you like a process of how you would do that, right? So if it was an appeal, a zoning permit application, when there's still some of them that exist out there, that was pre-Eclipse, March 13th, it was filed pre-Eclipse, but the notice of refusal was after March 13th. You have to go through a process it's called a legacy permit. You have to go through a process with the city where you have to fill out an authorization letter with the property owner who authorizes you to get affiliated with this account. And then you would get affiliated within a week or so, then you can file an Eclipse. If you're dealing with a project that's what's not considered a legacy permit, where there's these new numbers like Z whatever, all you need to do is talk to the real estate professional who is on the applicant for the account. They'll give you an access code. You take that access code, you put it in with the property address and the zoning permit number, and all of a sudden you're affiliated with the project and you can file the appeal, right? Now, what do you file with the appeal, right? So we looked at the application for appeal or the application for a special exception. You're going to either file the notice of refusal or the notice of referral. There's also what's called a project information form. So again, if you look at my materials, I actually give you the link to it. There's a form that the city of Philadelphia requires you to fill out with any zoning appeal, right? So for simpler projects, it's more of like who you are, who the property owner is. Boom, you're done. You get an email confirmation. You include that project completed and filed project information form with your appeal package. For more complicated projects, there's a lot more questions that you can obviously look at and you have to answer, and you have to work with your client on getting that, right? So you file the application, you got to have the project information form, you have to have the notice, and then it's how much money you have to pay. Like there's two tracks in Philadelphia to file an appeal. There's the expedited track and the standard track. The fee for the standard track to file a zoning appeal to the Zoning Board of Adjustment ranges from $125 to $300. Normal times, if you file under the standard track, you're going to get a hearing of 3 to 4 months from the date of the filing of the zoning appeal. You can also do expedited track. That's another $750 on top of the $125 to $300. And the reason why a lot of my clients do that is usually you get a hearing date within 45 to 60 days, right, from the time you file the appeal. A lot of my clients, time is money, and they want to be able to get through the process really quickly. So you file the appeal, and by the way, does anyone have any questions before I go to the next step? All right. So you file the appeal, and the way to pay it, like through Eclipse, you're going to pay it via credit card. I think there is a surge charge fee of like 2% of what you charge. So soon you'll be able to. Now you can mail the applications in, because I think the ZBA's administrator is up and running. Again, I would recommend that if you can't hand deliver the appeal packages, I would still do Eclipse, even though there's an extra fee. Again, hopefully can pass that along to the client and tell the client that at least there you have some confirmation that the appeal was filed, right? Now, in terms of how the community meeting takes place, right? So once the appeal is filed with the ZBA, right? Like right now, they haven't processed any of these applications. Usually I carry anywhere from 20 to 30 zoning appeals at any time. Usually it's like a 2 to 3 month, turnaround for most of my clients. So I'm always carrying 20 to 30. I'm carrying 60 zoning appeals right now, because all the zoning appeals I filed since COVID-19 happened, where the city shut down, essentially, the ZBA, while I'm filing these appeals on Eclipse and they're being accepted, the ZBA is not processing them. Typically, normal times, once I file the appeal, the ZBA will let me know of the estimated hearing date, right? So I know in my mind. And then the ZBA notifies the Planning Commission that an appeal was filed, right? What the Planning Commission does is then they they reach out to the district council person for that particular property, right? Everyone has, a different council person depending on where they live, right? A district council person. There's at-large seats as well. But say we're in Brewerytown, we're going to have Darrell Clark as our district council person. So someone reaches out to Darrell Clark's office, each district council person has a zoning aide who is like designated as the point of contact for zoning matters. So for Darrell Clark's office, for instance, it's Mary Jones right now, right? So they reach out to Mary and say, okay, Mary, blah, 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 filed an appeal, a zoning appeal as to this address, right? Who do you want to designate as the coordinating RCO, right? So I mentioned that terminology before, RCO. That's a registered community organization. And there's a process for a community group to become what's considered an RCO. But if you go on atlas.phila.gov, you'll see for any property, there are certain RCOs that are affiliated with that property. So Mary will look and see which RCO, Atlas is just a tool for us, but there's an actual page, with all of the RCOs in the city. And I put that on page 5 of materials. You can go to www.phila.gov.rco notification, and you can put the address yourself. But they'll say, okay, Mary, tell us who you want to put as a coordinating RCO. Technically, this process of selecting the coordinating RCO, it has to take place 7 days from the date of the filing of the zoning appeal and it being processed, right? I hate to say it, it doesn't always happen that way. It tends to be a lot slower. But, eventually Mary or whomever will let the, planning commission know who the coordinating RCO is. We will then get a letter or an email from the planning commission, right? I would get an email if I'm the attorney of record for the file. The Mary, as the councilman zoning aide, would get an email, and all of the RCOs affiliated with that property will get an email stating who the coordinating RCO is. They'll attach a copy of the notice, whether it's a refusal or a referral, and then they will indicate that a meeting needs to take place, before the hearing, right? I then have to reach out to that coordinating RCO and all the RCOs within 20 days from the date that we filed the zoning appeal, right? And the council person, trying to figure out to try to schedule an actual community meeting before the people within the community, right? We were very diligent about that. It takes a lot more. My zoning practice is all about follow-up. I usually typically first try to call the coordinating RCO's rep. Again, you can look on atlas.phila.gov. You'll see the person's name, email address, and phone number. Fortunately, sometimes it's not always updated, so you have to work around that, sometimes dealing with the council person to find out if they have alternative means of access to that community group. But we usually reach out to them, and we then find out, okay, what's your process like? Some are more formal than others. Like if you're dealing with the Center City Residents Association, they have their guidelines online. Fishtown Neighbors Association, they have their guidelines online. South Kensington Community Partners has their guidelines online. But each group is different in how organized they are, but also the process, right? So some groups, you'll just go straight to the community meeting, and we'll talk about that a little later. Other groups, you're going to first meet. You'll fill out basically a project intake form. You may meet with just the executive director or the representative from the group, or you may actually have a full-fledged meeting with the executive board of the group, or they have a zoning committee with the group, and they kind of flesh out the project. So you have to find out first if it's a two-step process or a one-step process, right? Either way, you're still going to prepare for the meeting, like how you would prepare for, whether it's an executive board meeting or the community meeting. The materials are usually the same that I would present at the meeting. The only thing different, I would say, is that I typically blow up the drawings and I create poster boards for my presentations, for the community meeting and the ZBA hearing. I tend not to do that for the executive board meeting, right? So let's just say we go to the community meeting, whether it's because we already finished up the pre-community portion of it, or there is no pre-community portion of it, or meeting portion of it. We're preparing for the community meeting, right? So we have to get the date, time, and location of the community meeting. Well, how do we let people know there's a community meeting? right? So I gave you a template for notices that go to the community. I'm going to take a look at it, but that exhibit, let's see.
Well, you're looking for that. I'm going to jump in and read the code, the next code there, Alan.
Yeah.
The second participation code is Eclipse. Eclipse is the second code. One more time, the second code is Eclipse. And Alan, I do have a question. Do you want me to hold it or do you want me to read it now?
No, read it now. That's fine.
Okay. The question is, why are there multiple RCOs affiliated with one property?
There are a lot of people who are interested or want to be interested in dealing with a property. Again, that's one of the things you have to deal with too. There's competing interests. There are people who want to be involved and, you know, or be in charge, honestly. And you'll have, like, say, 5 groups, right? Group 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, right? There's really only, like, say, for the most part, like usually like at most 2 active groups for, you know, that actually administer the community meetings, right? But as you see, like, you'll have group 1, right? They want to do the community meeting because they want to have influence over the process, right? All of a sudden, there may be a competing faction which grows within that group, and then they form their own. And then, you know, there's always a fight of, you know, oh, you should meet with me, you should meet with me. And all I say is, I'm going to meet with whoever the coordinating RCO is. Really, the coordinating RCO should only be the one who administers the meeting. They should have, basically, they shouldn't, like, influence the process. They're here to merely provide a forum, right? But there are a lot of people within the community that want to be involved in that. So that's why there are multiple RCOs. But practically, most of the RCOs you never hear from, they just want to know what's going on in their community. There's usually, again, only 1 or 2 RCOs that are very active in terms of this zoning variance and approval process. Okay, so now we're going to try to do the community meeting, right? So you're like, how do I get this? What do I tell them? And who do I send it to, right? So if you look at Exhibit E, I provided the form that the Planning Commission gives us, you know, in terms of sending out notice if a meeting hasn't been scheduled yet and we're within the 20 days, or if we're outside, or if a meeting has been scheduled within the 20 days or outside the 20 days, what you should give, right? So basically, say, this is what I do. Like, because it's hard, because you have to send this, by the way, like through a certificate of mailing, right? So, you know, you look at, you know, the name of the applicant, the property address, the date the ZBA appeal was filed. You would look at, you know, the property description. So what you're, basically all I say is see notice of refusal. Project description, see notice of refusal. You know, summary refusal, see notice of refusal. And then you're going to put who the coordinating RCO is, and then with the, if you have a meeting, the date, time, and location of the property. Then, you know, who lower down, who the council person zoning aid is, and then you're going to CC the ZBA, the Planning Commission, and then you're going to CC the council person on this, and you're going to CC all the RCOs on this thing. And how it goes out, and then what I do is, as I trifold, I actually have, like, on one side of the page, this, what you see as an example, and the other side of the page, I actually download the notice of refusal or referral, and then we create it as a trifold. And then the addresses we put it on, again, that's in my materials, but there's a specific website where you put your address, and then it tells you all those addresses that are within a 250-foot radius of your property. You have to mail all of those notices out to those people, right? And then you have to give a certificate of mailings from the post office saying that you mailed that, right? So it was a cumbersome process. This happened like a year or 2 ago, where we had to change the way we did business. We used to have our clients hand deliver the notices of the community meeting, and we used to have a different letter. But, like, you know, they required this letter, and they required a mailing requirement. So it definitely made it more cumbersome. So this process is not for the faint of heart for multiple reasons. So let's say I get the notice out, which, by the way, has to go out at least 10 days before the community meeting, right? How do I plan? What happens at the community meeting, right? Well, again, it's not for the faint of heart. I recommend that, like, don't talk like a lawyer, right? We're all human beings. We're talking to human beings. People who usually come to these meetings are twofold. people who are affected, like who are directly impacted by a project. Someone to the left of me, someone to the right of me, someone in front of me, someone behind me. Like those are the people that are like who are maybe nervous of what's going on. Is there a restaurant going in there? Is there a club going in there? Is there an apartment building going in there that's going to decrease the the amount of parking spots in there? There's always issues about gentrification. In terms of like, oh, you're doing improvements to my neighborhood, my taxes are going to go up, I'm concerned about that. But the people who are like directly impacted, of course should have a say of what's going on. But the second type of people who are there are just people who come to all these meetings. And, and they may or may not be impacted. Some have an agenda. Some are just good-hearted people who want to do positive impact, to their community, or make sure that negative impacts are not made to their community. So, you gotta be able to talk to them and not at them, or talk with them and not at them. So my philosophy is this, I'm not an attorney. I'm here merely to present this project and to hear what they have to say. And, we try to give them as much information as possible, give them the respect, in terms of listening to their concerns. And, hopefully get through that process where we can come to some, happy approval between everyone, or at least if it's not an approval, that we reached a point where we can compromise that it makes sense. And if even the compromise that doesn't make sense doesn't get you some community support, that will help you at the ZBA level, right? Because the ZBA understands that you can only do so much, right? If a project makes sense, then it should, the ZBA is not going to say no for the most part, right? And that's what happens through experience, like what makes sense, in general, right? So I tell my clients this: if I walk by a property and I look at it and it fits within the fabric of that neighborhood, it looks like it, it sounds like a duck, it quacks like a duck, it's a duck, right? So if I'm building a single family home and it looks exactly like basically all the other single family homes in the neighborhood, and I may need some dimensional variance in the back, but the back of my property doesn't go any deeper than any other properties, then that makes sense. Same thing with a multifamily. If I'm building a multifamily property and there's a lot of multifamily properties in the area, and even though the zoning code doesn't allow that, well, that makes sense. Same thing with a special exception with a restaurant. If I have an experienced operator of a business that is a good actor, and the neighborhood's concerned, oh, well, you're going to open up a restaurant in this vacant commercial property. Well, that's going to cause noise, and this is going to cause increase in parking. We're going to say, responsible operator of a business. It's a special exception, so it's like conditionally approved anyway. And the standard is, again, and you can look at and I kind of go backwards, but like if you look at the application for special exception and the application for appeal, you have to fill out the reasons why these applications should be granted. So those are the standards that, we have to embrace as the zoning attorneys and as the applicant. And we'll talk about that a little later on. But if we can show, for instance, for a special exception, that our use is typical of the use that would be expected in that property, and it's no worse than what would be expected, then it should be approved. It's a lower standard special exception than the variance. Variance is undue hardship. A variance means it's outside the code. Why should we allow you to go outside the code? So you have to show some special circumstances and undue hardship. Special exceptions, like it's conditionally approved. We know that this is an appropriate use of the property. You just got to show that you're no worse than any other person who would use that. It's just in a typical fashion. But anyway, so go to the community meeting. You got to put a presentation together. I recommend to put, to hand out materials, right? So what I usually do in my handout, the first page is actually the community notice. So then they have the notice of that went out to the people within 250-foot radius, date, time, and location of the meeting, and it has the actual notice of refusal or referral. Underneath that, I put the maps, right? So if I'm doing a use variance, I'll have the zoning map that I'll take a screenshot of, and then I would actually label our property. And if it can show that, like, oh, well, we're asking for multi-use here, and we're RSA 5, but it's color-coded. You'll see like all the RM1 that's surrounded here. Well, that makes sense. Or like we had this one project on the 1400 block of North 7th Street, where we actually changed this. We got zoning variances from multiple clients over the course of like a year or two, where we got a half a dozen changes or variances approved. So we did a grid, we did the zoning map, and then we did a key of the projects that we did, but there were other projects as well that also got variances. Again, and we found that information on Atlas, right? Because we talked about how you can like look up like what has been approved within a certain radius of the property. That's a good tool to be able to use for your community meetings and hearings, right? Then after we have the maps, we may even have a Google map in there to kind of show what businesses are are around there. And then, again, the purpose in the map also is to show the community where the property is in relation to the community. Not everyone knows every section of their community, so they want to know where the property is in relation to like what else is around there. Then the next thing that we do are the drawings, right? So, if it's a new construction project, you'll have a site plan, you'll have elevations, you'll have floor plans. Like these are things to focus on. If you have a restaurant, you're gonna have floor plans, which are more detailed from a commercial point of view. Residential, you'll have more from the residential point of view. And then the other thing that I always ask my clients to do are like renderings, right? So like, show me the space interior, show me the space exterior. It's pretty, it makes it look good. It shows how you look professional. And then any other documentation or information that can support your zoning appeal, right? So if you're a restaurant operator, give me an example of a menu that you have. If you're a pre-existing operator of a similar business, give me some reviews that we can put into the materials. If you're doing, like, we've done a lot of doggy daycares, give me your license for your other locations. If you're doing like group housing, or an old age facility, like give me something to that effect as well, whatever licenses you need. So we we hand out the materials. We try not to overwhelm the community, but we try to give them the respect, saying, here's the information that you should think about when we present, and we can go over it together. And then we have them on poster boards, because some community groups are in like a conference room where we have like say 10 or 15 people, where it's a lot more informal. But some of them, I'm in an auditorium where I'm presenting in front of 100 or more people, right? So be prepared to spend the night there sometimes, because there's usually multiple zoning matters, not just yours. But be prepared to know what type of forum you're going to be in, right? If you're going to be in something a little bit more intimate, maybe you'll need the poster boards. If you're going to be in something larger, well, clearly you're going to need to get the poster boards, and you're probably going to need to get a handout to everyone who's there, because the worst thing that can happen is you don't have enough handouts and then someone feels disrespected, right? So we meet with the community group, and there's a letter, which I didn't include, but like there's a form letter that they have to give afterwards, right? They're going to take a vote, right? They're going to either support the project, they're not going to oppose the project, or they're not going to, oppose the project. So, support, non-oppose, oppose, right? They'll take a vote. The planning commission has a form letter. They'll, most groups use it, right? They'll say how many people voted in whichever category. The other thing to focus on, they have like certain people can vote specially, like if they're within a certain proximity. I believe it's 500 feet. It really should be 250 feet, but you'll see within 500 feet, if you live within 500 feet, they'll specially note how those people voted, because they're the most affected by the property. And once the vote is taken, you'll get a letter with a summary before the hearing. That's a follow-up over and over and over again. And then it'll go to the ZBA, that letter. It'll go to the council person zoning aid, and it'll go to me, as well as all of the RCOs. That's when you have to follow up with the council person zoning aid. If a project is either, if there's a position of non-opposition, or if there's a position of support, 99 out of 100 times the zoning aid will tell you that the council person supports it unless it's something quirky, right? Some district council people write a letter to the ZBA, stating their position. Some will have their zoning aides show up specifically to the hearing. Some don't give any position. So you have to really know every office is a little bit different. And I don't want to name names, but some offices, it doesn't even matter if you have support of the community. There are some offices that have certain policies about certain projects. So as long as you get the community support, you almost don't even want to reach out to the council person, because you know that all you may be doing is highlighting that you're doing this project, and they may send a notice of opposition, or they may have their council person zoning aide go to the hearing in opposition. Usually when you have the council person against something, then it's definitely a different hurdle to overcome in front of the ZBA. Now, if the community is against the project, right?
Alan, can I jump in right before you get into this? I don't want to interrupt that part of it. Let me just do the third code and then get out of your way. Third code is L and I. One more time, the third code is L and I. Okay, back to you. Thanks.
Okay. So if the community is against the project, or the council person is against the project, well, if you go in front of the ZBA, you're going to lose unless you're prepared, right? And there's workarounds to this. So if it was a close vote and you lost, or it wasn't a well-attended community meeting and you lost, or it's just a wacky letter that you want to address, a couple things that you may want to think about. I am a big believer in having my clients do a petition around the property with the surrounding property owners or people who are occupants of there, where you can get a petition for supporting this project. So we usually have a form that we created saying, this is the project, this is the notice of refusal behind it, give me your name, give me your address, sign, check that you're in support of it, and then sign it, right? That's very impactful for the zoning board. And by the way, it's very impactful for the council person, because sometimes the council person will go against the community group if there were, again, something strange, like not a lot of people at the community meeting, or it just didn't make sense, their decision. So that petition of support will actually help you with the council person and help you in front of the zoning board. The other thing is like you dissect the letter. If it's against you, you have to say, why is it against me? Are they looking at zoning related issues, right? Are they talking about gentrification? Are they talking about hey, I want, which is not zoning related? Are they talking about oh, we want parking here on an RM1 property or an RSA 5 property, off-street parking? Well, that's not zoning related, because the code actually prohibits off-street parking for RM1 properties or RSA 5 properties. So if they're bringing in issues that don't make sense, that are not relevant to this, or they're saying, well, the proposed building structure is too high, but we meet the zoning code, we may be getting refused because our building structure is too deep, but our building structure, the end of it, is still not as deep as the ones surrounding us. Well, that's the reason why we should grant the variance. But in Philadelphia, an RSA 5 property or RM1 property, you can't build higher than 38 feet, right? They're like, well, we want it 33 feet. But that's not an issue, that's before them. So you have to focus your attention when preparing for the hearing on, if you have issues in the terms of lack of support, focus on the letter itself, and then you have to start to prepare for the hearing, saying they're focused on this, they're focused on that, they're focused on this. Then you do the comparison too. Look at other projects that the ZBA has approved, not just in this neighborhood, but in other neighborhoods. And you can do the research by going on atlas.phila.gov. You can also, the zoning board has a calendar, right? And you can go in reverse order and see what other things they have approved. Now, I have the benefit because I go to the ZBA almost every week. So I sit in all those hearings. So I know what they're going to approve just based on my experience, but also hearing how other people have presented projects. So I know the other projects that are basically in town. Okay. So what happens at the ZBA hearing? Well, first of all, how do we know when the ZBA hearing is? Well, after we get notice from the Planning Commission of who the coordinating RCO is, and what we also get from the ZBA administrator, probably within a couple weeks after the filing of the zoning appeal, is a big orange poster that says zoning notice, right? And it has like the fact that there's an appeal as to this particular property, and this is the date, time, and location of the hearings. Right now, we'll see, but like typically it's at 1515 Arch Street, the hearings, 18th floor in the hearing room. The administrator's office is off to the side, right? That's where you would file the appeals. So once we get the orange poster, along with the orange poster, we actually have to take the notice of refusal or referral we have and post that, the orange poster and the notice of refusal, on every public street that fronts the property. So if we have a corner property and it's 3rd and Race, you would put the orange poster and the notice of refusal on 3rd Street, and then also on Race Street. If it's a building structure there, you just put it to the front of the property building structure. If it's a vacant lot, you just have to put stakes in there and make sure it stays up. And it has to stay up for at least 21 consecutive days before the actual hearing, right? So you have to make sure your client takes pictures of when they took it, burn the date it was in, and have your client periodically go by the property. It's not uncommon that these posters are ripped down. You just have to ask for the posters again. I think there's a fee associated with that of $65 per new poster, right? So you show up at the hearing, right? In addition to the presentation materials that we talked about, there are a couple other items that you're going to need to give to the ZBA. You need to show some type of proof that you have some interest as the applicant in that property, right? So if you own the property, then as an applicant or appellant here, you just give a copy of your deed, right? If you're looking to buy the property and you're trying to get zoning approval before the closing, you would give a copy of the agreement of sale that's executed by the parties. Now you can redact like the purchase price and some other confidential information, because this is stuff of public record. Now, if you're a tenant in the property, you would again give the lease to the property, and again redact what delicate information there is. So you would either give a copy of the deed, a copy of a lease, a copy of agreement of sale as applicable. The other thing that you need to do is you need to give a tax clearance certificate to the zoning board. Again, we gave you the website address for that, but these tax clearance certificates you can get online. It doesn't cost any money. You would go in, you would say it's for the zoning board. Make sure it's the right tax clearance certificate. A lot of clients screw that up. And also make sure you have the right property and you put the right owner's information in there, or the tenant. So if you own the property, it's simple. You put your information in, you put your EIN in, you put the address of the property in. It'll spit out a tax clearance certificate saying that you're compliant. These tax clearance certificates are only good for 30 days. So you have to get this at least within that 30-day period. If you have an old one, if your client gave you an old one, gotta get a new one before the hearing. That's something you should definitely get. You should calendar it 30 days before the hearing. We have clients all the time where they're not tax compliant because they didn't pay a water bill, or they bought the property at a sheriff's sale and there's something wrong with the property in terms of liens that the sheriff's office didn't deal with. It's hard to get these issues dealt with rather quickly. So that's one of the longer lead times. Get the tax clearance certificate within that 30-day period on day one of 30, right? So if there's issues, right? And if you're a tenant, you should get the tax clearance certificate for the tenant and the tax clearance certificate for the landlord, the property owner. And if it's an agreement of sale, make sure that it's the actual buyer's tax clearance certificate, because people mess that up too. They're like, oh, I just got you a tax clearance certificate from my business that I typically do, XYZ LLC. But I said, but you just formed the sole purpose entity, 123 Main Street. I don't need XYZ LLC. I need 123 Main Street LLC, tax clearance certificate. So what you also would provide at the hearing level is the letter from the RCO and hopefully a letter of support from the council person. And then any other additional materials, like if we need to put together a petition, or we did some more research after the community meeting about similar situations of like properties being approved within that community or within that block, or just in general by the ZBA. And then, I put the standard for undue hardship. I put the standard, obviously, for a variance, the undue hardship variance standard. I have put the standard in my materials about a special exception as well. Just to let you know, you make your presentation. There are 5 members of the zoning board. Three members have to be there for a quorum. It's taxpayer standing. So after you make your presentation to the board, anyone, as long as they live in the city of Philadelphia, can make a presentation as well. On appeal, it's a little bit different, but for the zoning board of adjustment, again, most times they'll let someone speak, right? Unless it's just something that's a little bit off, right? Once you fulfill your presentation, the board, and usually the presentations are anywhere from 5 minutes to an hour, depending on how complicated they are. You'll submit all of these documents into evidence, like it would be any type of hearing. Then what happens is the members of the board listens to a representative from the planning commission, who gives a recommendation from the planning commission of whether to accept the appeal or grant the appeal or deny the appeal. Then the zoning board of adjustment makes a decision on this, most times on the spot. Sometimes they'll hold it under advisement if it's a controversial project and there's opposition, or if we can't come to a resolution, like the zoning board likes to hear that everyone's in favor of something. If there's any issues, they may say, how about this? We'll hold it under advisement for like a month. Why don't you guys see if you can come to some type of resolution, and then let us know what the issue is, or if it has been resolved. And then they'll make a decision, behind closed doors, essentially. They'll make a decision, and then on the spot, and you'll know if it's either been granted or not. You have to get a majority of the board at that time to grant, to have a favorable decision. So if there are 3 members of the board there at the time of the hearing, you need 2. If there's 4 members who are present at the time, then you need 3 still. And if there's 5 members of the board at the time of the hearing, you need 3, right? So the only other thing to think about, during this process, sometimes there's changes to the scope of the project, or there's changes to maybe the building structure or whatever. Some changes you don't need to actually change up the notice of refusal. Some you do. So if you're changing the dimensions of a property, that you increase the amount of the variances or you add on other variances, you have to amend the zoning appeal. And the way to amend the zoning appeal is you need permission from the zoning board's administrator. You have to send written request saying, I would like to change up the project where I may get new variances or I may eliminate variances, right? And so you would actually have to file another zoning permit application with L&I, and they'll give you another notice of refusal. And then all you do is take that notice of refusal, give it to ZBA administrator, and say, please make sure that this notice of refusal is the operative document for the zoning appeal. Other thing is, if you're changing the plans, like the actual physical structure of the properties, ZBA, if you're successful, that ZBA decision will go back to the L&I, and then L&I will grant a zoning permit based on what was originally submitted to them. If the plans are different in some respects, you have to get those new plans stamped by the ZBA saying that they're the ones that are incorporated within this appeal. So then what happens is, and I wrote a little bit about this in my decision, my materials, you take those, once it's stamped by the ZBA, those plans are the operative plans. So when you get your zoning permit, it's based on those new plans. So it's really important that you make sure that if you're making changes in your project, they're properly accounted for. So if and when you get a zoning permit, there's no hiccups on the way. The other thing to think about from a restaurant point of view, just as an example, so the ZBA could add conditions to the zoning permit. They're called provisos. So you'll see this a lot with restaurants. They may put the hours of operation of the restaurant in the proviso. They may put occupancy levels in the proviso. They may talk about like a garbage plan as a proviso to add to the zoning permit. So these are things to think about as well. So I know that, you know, I try to rush through. I always run out of time. I apologize for that. But does anyone have any? And by the way, if you get a decision, well, you will get a decision. It's called a notice of decision, and you usually get that within a week from the date of the hearing. Now you can pick that up, which I typically do, or it's usually mailed within a week or two. And then you submit that notice of decision back to L&I, who will then give you what's called a billing statement for the zoning permit, assuming it was a favorable decision. And then once your client pays whatever the bill is, they get the zoning permit, and that's it. Any questions?
Okay, Alan, let me jump in with the fourth code. And let me just say this. Now I know why you can specialize your practice in this, because it was exhausting listening to you. It's an amazing process. Okay, the fourth and final participation code is RCO. One more time, RCO. RCO. Anybody have any questions? I would take them via chat, or if you want to unmute yourself. Going once, going twice. All right, Alan, looks like that's it. Thank you very much for that. This was an amazing class. I'll tell you, honestly, it was amazing.
Yeah, I apologize. I always put too much information.
No. Too much is good, but to me, it's terrifying. Like, wow, that's so much to keep track of.
Yeah, I mean, really, this should be a 2-hour class because I kind of jumped through like some other stuff that are important. So if anyone has any questions, you know, feel free to call me. My the main line of my law firm is 215-399-1346. My email address is alan.nochumson@nochumson.com.
Thank you very much. Do very much appreciate it, Alan. This was a great class. And thank you, everyone, for participating. Don't forget to send me that email. Thank you.